I'm on the road having a little bit of a vacation. I'm here in Brighton, England, and I've got 16-bit gaming on the brain because I've been playing a lot of Sega Genesis Mini, but I've also got the Sega Genesis Classics collection that Sega released last year for the Switch, which is what I've been playing it on, but it's also out there for the PS4 and Xbox One. I think you can pick up a PC version of this as well. The Sega Genesis Classics collects about 50 different games, depending on what platform you're playing them on. All of them pretty much published by Sega, whereas the collection of 42 games that's on the Sega Genesis Mini is a lot of Sega titles, but also quite a few cool third-party published games, which are a welcome fit on the Sega Genesis Mini and make that an incredibly enticing purchase because you get the little retro console and you get the couple of controllers. So it's pretty cool to be able to turn on that little mini machine and have access to all of these 16-bit games. But it's also super cool to be able to turn on my Switch and go into this virtual living room and have 50 Sega Genesis games at my disposal. Now, in the classics on that collection, the emulation is handled by a completely different company than M2, which is one of the most prestigious emulation developers out there. They've been doing a fantastic job porting all kinds of titles, but Sega worked with them to emulate and port all of the games to the Sega Genesis Mini. And I haven't done a deep dive to kind of compare how the Mini software looks to the original cartridges. And, you know, I'm not going to have like a whole sort of introspective kind of breakdown of how the emulation works across these different platforms. I just felt like it wasn't as rock solid playing it on the classics, and particularly when I was playing the Streets of Rage games, they felt a little slippery, a little less refined, and that might have something to do with the fact that on the classics collection, they have a feature that I absolutely love, and that's the ability to rewind or fast forward as you're playing some of these games, which is pretty damn cool and handy because, as we all know, 16-bit titles can be excruciatingly difficult, and not all of these games had battery save back in the day. Of course, you can save to the internal memory and to the storage that you have on your platforms on both, on the Classics collection and also on the Mini. So saving at any time is super handy, and you're going to use that. But I do like that rewind feature quite a bit on the Sega Genesis Classics. Something also that I really like about the Sega Genesis Classics is that you get 1, 2, and 3 of the Streets of Rage games. You get 3 Golden Axe games. You get a bunch of the Phantasy Star games. You get Vector Man 1 and 2. You've got treasure games in there like Dynamite Headdy and Gunstar Heroes, which I love. There is a little bit of crossover where you're seeing Sega library titles on the Mini and you're also seeing them in the Classics, but you don't get as many of a particular series. So you don't get all the Streets of Rage games on the Mini. You only get 2. You don't get Phantasy Star 2, 3, and 4. You only get 4. There's no Sword of Vermilion or Rise Star on the Sega Genesis Mini. But at the same time, there is no Road Rash 2 on the Sega Genesis Classics. There's no Super Fantasy Zone. There is no Earthworm Jim or Contra or Mega Man or Castlevania. And those are all very welcome additions on the Mini. The Classics collection has this sort of digital living room, which is kind of cool with retro posters and things up on the wall. It's definitely charming, and it's super convenient, and it's a blast to be able to be traveling like I am right now and dive right in and play these games anywhere I want to on my Switch. If you're a Sega fan, a fan of the Sega published stuff for the Genesis, you've got a nice big chunk of titles right there. It's also quite a bit cheaper than the $80 US or $100 Canadian that you're going to pay for the Sega Genesis Mini. But of course, with that Mini, you also get kind of like a scale model of a working scale model of the Sega Genesis with a couple of pack-in USB classic style Sega Genesis controllers, which feel fantastic. Just the hardware feature alone is pretty enticing if you're a Sega Genesis fan like I am. Plus 42 games that offer a pretty good look at the breadth of titles that were available for that platform. They chose some really solid games for the Sega Genesis Mini. The question I pose to you, are you that much of a Genesis fan that you're going to be cool having both libraries? And the convenience of, particularly if you get it for the Switch, the convenience of being able to play these Sega Genesis Classics anywhere that you want to. For me, that works, because I didn't know how much I was going to love playing 16-bit software in 2019, but I truly, truly do. This kind of fad of these retro consoles is something that is really working for me. I'm going to have a full review of the Sega Genesis Mini, but I got to tell you, it's been kind of a treat to be ensconced, to be completely enveloped by all of this retro gaming goodness. But I leave this with you. The choice is yours. Do you want the Mini Genesis and the Sega Genesis Classics? look deep in your soul and ask yourself how much you are a fan of Sega.